Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from AnthonyMorganti.com. This is episode 19 of the video series where I critique and process your image. In this episode, we're taking a look at this image from Mike. And first glance, it's a pretty mundane image. We have a couple birds on a ledge. But there's a lot of creative things we could do with this image, in my opinion. And I just want to go over some creative ideas you could do, specifically about cropping. But ultimately, I'd like to encourage you not to crop and to capture these when you're out taking pictures, to capture what we're going to do. And you'll understand more of what I'm trying to say as I get into it. So we're going to do this image completely in Lightroom. We're not going to use any plugins, but we're going to do it three different ways, at least three different ways. But we're going to start with this base image. This is going to be our base image. And as far as his camera settings, Mike's camera settings, I think they're perfect. He was at f8. Now he obviously focused on the birds. He was at 70 millimeters. So at 70 millimeters, he was fairly close, not, not super close, but fairly close. And when you're at 70 millimeters and you're focusing on something more in the foreground, your background will tend to be softer, even at f8. And that's good, though, in this case, because the softer background helps make the birds pop out a little more. So they're a little more obvious. They look like the subject of the image. So that was perfect. ISO 200 is fine. 1/250th of a second, fine. So it's a very nice shot. I like the camera settings. So let's just start processing this image. What we're going to do is we're going to do lens corrections here in the chromatic aberration. We're going to do that right away. We're going to jump up to the crop tool, and I'm just going to hit auto to straighten it. It's just a tiny bit crooked, so we'll do that. Okay, now those are things we're going to do to all three different ways I'm going to crop this image. So what I'm going to do from this point is I'm going to make two virtual copies. So there's one, and then we're going to create another one. And with the virtual copies, we're going to crop it two different ways. Now, we have the birds, they're on the left side of the frame, and it's what Mike did was perfect. They're looking into the larger part of the frame. I mention all the time, you have something with eyes in it, bird, a person, a statue, a painting, I don't care if it has eyes, and it's looking off camera, have it look into the larger part of the frame. Perfect. It's not really in a rule of thirds area or anything like that, or the ubiquitous rule of thirds, and it's not really in a golden spiral or any probably other type of crop overlay that we could come up with that would, help it. Now, as I look at the overall scene though, I really do like the sky and I like the steeple up here. So I'd like to try to keep those in the shot, but I would like the birds to be a little more like important in the shot. To me, they're there, but we have all this empty space over here, and this part isn't as important. And I always talk about decide what is the worst part of your scene and minimize it in your post-processing. Decide what is the best in the scene and try to emphasize it or show it off. Now, you would prefer to do that in camera. When you approach the scene with your camera, okay, well, what do I like? Well, I like the birds, I like that steeple, I like the sky. So frame it in such a way that would emphasize those. So how could we do that? Well, you know, we'll see. But maybe we could come up with a creative crop where we only have this one image to work with. So I am going to pull up from this side, and we're going to keep that sky up there. Now we have the birds pretty much bullseyed. They're in the middle, but they are more like in the forefront of the scene. They are looking off still into an empty part of the frame, so that's good. So let's just ride with this. Okay, so this is going to be one crop. Now we'll jump to this other one. Now in this one, now, we have this big part of the image over here, but the birds are kind of looking down. So when I look at this crop, they're looking down, but there's all this space over here that they're not looking at, and it doesn't look balanced. It doesn't look visually balanced because the birds are looking slightly down. So with this crop, why don't we try something different? Let's crop down, and let's see if I could get the pigeon's eye on a rule of thirds area and try to minimize the sky now. We don't want to emphasize the sky anymore. Let's see how we could do this. How about something like that? Now we don't want to cut any of the bird off. Usually when you're photographing an animal, it could be an insect to, a giraffe. You don't want to cut off parts of it. You don't want the tails cut off. You don't want, if it's an insect and they have long antennae, you don't want to cut those off. You want those all in the frame. The only exception to that is if you're doing a portrait like a headshot or even a three-quarter portrait, maybe a gorilla holding her baby, and you just want to do, her from the baby up. That's okay, stuff like that. So generally speaking, though, if you're just taking shots of animals, you don't want to cut off any of the animal, or for people either, for that matter. If you're getting whole body shots of people, you don't want to cut them off at the ankle or anything like that. So let's go with this. Now there actually is another crop that kind of occurred to me. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to create another virtual copy. And we already straightened that, yes. Okay, so what we're going to do though is we're just going to reset this and then we're going to straighten it. Okay, now we're going to crop this vertically. So I'm going to hit the X key and we're going to try a vertical crop. Now see, the 2:3 ratio just isn't cutting it for this vertical crop. I like to keep my 2:3 ratio, but it just isn't cutting it. It's just too narrow and we're not really achieving what we want to achieve. So let's do a 4:5. This would be a good crop if you're going to be printing an 8:10. We get the steeple in there, but then the birds are looking into the smaller part of the frame, so that isn't working either. So 8.5 by 11 is even narrower. So none of those are really cutting it for me. I don't know. We could do, let's go back to as shot, sorry. Let's go to a custom crop. No, let's do this. Let's enter a custom crop. And let's go to a 4:3 aspect ratio, like a micro 4/3 camera. So we're just going to put a 4 there. It's going to crop it horizontally, but we'll fix that. 4:3 like that. And just click OK. So now we have this micro 4/3. Now let's flip that by hitting the X key. And that still isn't cutting it for me. So we got to eliminate that. So I don't think vertical's working for me at all. So I tried. So we're going to get rid of that. So I'm just going to delete that virtual copy. All right, and so we're just going to deal with these two like I originally set out to do. All right, now let's go to the original image and let's process the original image. Now there's not going to be any different weird processing here, nothing that I normally don't do. I'm going to bring highlights down. I'm looking at the sky. I want to try to emphasize detail in the sky, so I brought highlights down. I'm going to open shadows up, which of course is going to flatten the image out a little bit. Then I'm going to add a clarity. Like around 25 looks good. Let's go up too high. Go up even to like 35 maybe. Okay, and we're going to add just a touch of vibrance. No saturation. I'm going to go to the tone curve. Now I get emails still about why I prefer to add contrast using the tone curve. I actually have a video that explains the differences between the tone curve for contrast and the basic panel contrast slider. And it actually is different, and you could actually see it in the histogram. I will link that video below this video if you guys want to watch that haven't seen it. And it's just, now it's not objective. I'm not saying that the tone curve contrast is superior to the slider that's in the basic panel for contrast. It's subjective and I like it better. So maybe you will, maybe you won't. So just try it out and watch that video. So I think medium contrast works well for this image. We'll go back up to the basic panel. I'm going to get a quick white point by holding in the shift key and double clicking, and then a quick black point by doing the same, but clicking on the word blacks. Okay, that looks all right, but it does look a little dark to me, just a touch. So I'm going to bring exposure up marginally, like a third of a stop almost, a little more than a third of a stop. So I'm done with the basic panel. I am going to go to the HSL panel. I'm going to go to saturation, and you can see this, trees over here. We have some various shades of green. That's nice. We have a little yellow in there too. But But I'm going to bring saturation of orange up just a little and saturation of yellow up just a little. Then I'm going to go to the luminance part of the tab, and I'm going to bring the luminance of the yellow up more. So it's going to make anything that has yellow in it a little brighter. And I don't think there's a little bit with orange in here. So that's good. And we'll take green down a little bit. So what I'm trying to get is a little more color depth in here, just a little more color depth. So we'll go with that. I'm not going to do any split toning. Let's go right to detail. There's barely any noise in this shot. All right, there is just a tiny bit. So we're going to do noise first. We're going to put it right on 40. It obliterated the noise. Let's go to 30. I really don't see any noise. So I'm just going to leave it there for the sake of argument. See something I want sharp, which is, of course, our subject, the bird. So we're going to put that like at 70. Looks good. There's a tiny, tiny bit of noise in there now. Let's bring this back up to 40-ish. That looks good. Yeah, 70 and 40, those are kind of what I mentioned in my training videos. If you just want to do detail really quick, sharpening somewhere in the 70s, noise reduction somewhere in the 40s usually works out pretty good. And in this image, it did work out well. So we're going to go with that. We did lens corrections. Nothing to transform here. So we're just going to go to our post-crop vignetting, and I'm going to add a slight dark vignette. All right, so this original image is done. Now I don't, it's done, I think, as far as the post-processing is concerned, I think it's the way I like it. I don't care for the crop, I don't care for the angle. This is where I encourage everyone, when you're out shooting, try different focal lengths, try different ways to shoot. Try to keep the birds maybe in the upper left-hand third, the lower right-hand third, the middle, try it all over. Try zooming in, zooming out, different angles. I'm not sure if Mike would have been able to get higher and shoot down on the birds or get lower and shoot up at the birds. Things like that. Try different things. One little tip is if you want something to look powerful and strong, shoot up at it. You'll often see images of engines of trains, and the photographer got low and shot up at the train engine. It looks more powerful. The engine looks, the train looks big and ominous and powerful. A lot of times you'll see pictures if you want a man or a woman or anyone, any person, to look big and strong, shoot up at them. If you want something to look tiny, smaller, weaker, you shoot down on it. So little tips you could do there. I'm not sure it would have helped either way or done anything much differently with this shot of these two birds, but that's something just to think about. All right, let's jump to our first crop, and let's just process this as though I didn't even process that last one. Now, I do want to bring some interest still in the sky. We have a lot of sky showing still. So we're going to bring highlights down. We're going to bring shadows up. And I don't have any clue what I set that last one on. As far as numbers, I didn't memorize anything. So I'm just doing this on my own as though I never did this before. We're going to bring clarity up pretty high. And mainly when I'm bringing clarity up, I'm just looking at the subject, which in this case, of course, is the birds. I like that. Vibrance up just a touch. Not going to do any saturation. We are going to jump right to the tone curve and add medium contrast. That looks okay. We are going to hold the shift key and double click on the word whites. And similarly for blacks. Okay, it does look a little dark now when I've done all that. So I am going to bring exposure up a touch. About a third of a stop or so. Looks better. I like that. HSL will do similar what I did over to the other one. We're going to go to Saturation tab, and I'm going to increase orange just a touch, yellow a little bit more. Go to the luminance. I'm going to make yellow a bit brighter. You can see the effect it has on the trees. Make orange a bit brighter. You can see it's making parts of the trees and some stuff off here in the distance a little brighter. So we'll roll with that. Maybe bring green down a little bit. Detail. Again, let's just do the quick and dirty. Let's bring that to 40, sharpening to 70. All right. Looks good so far. And then we could just go to our vignette and add a little bit of a heavier vignette on this than I think our last one. I don't know what our last one was. Oh, it's about the same. Okay, so there's the original shot, uncropped. just straightened. Here is our first crop. I have the birds' heads pretty much in the middle of the frame. They're in the lower part of the frame. And we have some sky in here, and we have the steeple. I like that steeple up there. All right, now here's a totally different crop. We have the birds in the upper third of the frame. We have this bird's eye pretty much on a rule of thirds location. Okay, the birds do seem to be looking a bit down, so they're looking into the larger part of the frame down. So I like that. I'm not so sure I like this right here, this little bright thing down here, but I don't think that's a big deal. All right, let's process this one independently. Now, there's not a lot of sky showing, barely any sky showing, so I am actually going to be adjusting the highlights, and I'm going to look over here as I adjust highlights. Like that, we're going to open up shadows quite a bit. Okay, we're going to add some clarity. I'm looking at the subject now. I'm just adjusting clarity to satisfy what I think the subject should look like. Again, this is all subjective. We're going to bring vibrance up a touch. Medium contrast should be good. Let's look at strong just in case. Strong's a little bit too strong. Let's go with medium. I suspect we're going to have to lighten this one up again, but let's hold the shift key in and double click on the word whites. There's our white point. Hold the shift key in, double click on the word blacks. There's our black point. Looks okay. I think it's still maybe a tiny bit dark, so I'm going to add a little bit of exposure, if I could, right around 0.3. That looks good. All right, we did the tone curve. The HSL color B&W, we do have some color in here. As we're zoomed, we're just got a tighter crop. So I'm not going to add any more saturation to it, but I am going to go to yellows, and I am going to just bring those up a touch. Just a little bit. See if we bring greens down. Yeah, we'll leave greens right in the middle. So on this one, I'm just bringing the luminance of the yellow up a touch. No split toning, detail. Now this is a tighter crop than the last one. So we might have a little bit more noise noticeable in this one. Let's go to 40. 40 pretty much obliterated. So let's go to our sharpening to 70. Yeah, that looks good. So we're just going to go with that. Looking good. I think we could just go to the vignette and add a little vignette. And again, I like to add the vignette. It helps draw everyone's attention more towards the middle of the frame. I don't care for this down here. It's just distracting a little bit. If you noticed it, you might dwell on it. So I'm going to get the brush tool, and we're going to reset the brush tool. We're going to bring exposure down, and we're just going to just bring that down a little bit so it's not as bright. We don't want anything really excessively bright, usually towards the outside of the frame. We do have the sky up here. I don't think it's a big deal in this case. It's kind of going right across. But if you wanted to, you could take a brush and try to darken that down a little bit if you thought it needed it. So I would say this one is done. So we have these three iterations of the same image. We have the original shot. The birds are kind of in the middle of the frame vertically. We have some nice sky. We have some colorful trees. Straight shot. Then we have our first crop. In this one, I kept the sky and the steeple, and we have colorful trees, and we have the birds more so in the middle. Their heads are right in the middle pretty much, and they're looking off into the larger part of the frame. This third crop, we pretty much eliminated the nice sky, but we have, I think, the subject in a stronger position. They're up here. Rule of thirds is right on this bird's eye, so it's somewhere that someone who just looks at the image would see almost immediately. And they're looking down towards the larger part of the frame. So in my opinion, I like this one the best of the three. This one second, and the original third. Now, couple things why I chose this image is just to encourage you folks when you're out taking pictures to try them, as I mentioned, different angles, different focal lengths, and put the subject in different points of the frame. Don't always shoot with the subject right in the middle, and don't necessarily shoot with the subject always, in the specific rule of thirds point of intersection that the textbook says you should shoot that way. Try it different ways. You could try maybe even the birds looking off into the smaller part of the frame if there was something interesting to the left. Sometimes you could break rules and it works, but most of the time it doesn't. These rules of composition are, I hate to call them rules, I always say, I like to call them strong suggestions. They work, and they should be respected, but you could try breaking it. But definitely take a couple shots where you're actually respecting those suggestions, all right? So I don't know, point below which one you like better, or if you have an idea for a different crop. A square crop might have worked. I don't care for square crops myself, but maybe a square crop might have worked. I couldn't get a horizontal one to work, but maybe you have a trick that would make a horizontal crop work better for this image. Thank you, Michael, for sharing your image with us. I really do appreciate it, and thank you everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.